people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
To the mother relay, we're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this, a continuation to a story we talked about in the previous video. Javon Davis shuts down talk of facing Naoya Inoue, saying he's nowhere near my weight. An idea that was pitched and talked about several weeks ago, immediately after the Stephen Fulton fight. An idea that Naoya Inoue himself shut down, as well as Javon Davis. Seems that the people at the Rise podcast, who have a channel right here on YouTube, proposed the idea that Naoya Inoue should venture north of 122 pounds, about 4 divisions north of 122, up to 135, to face Javon Davis. And to that, Javon said, I'm not fighting him. Davis posted on Instagram, he's nowhere near my weight. I don't know why this page keeps posting shit like this.
Do they not understand weight classes or something?
No, they understand weight classes just fine. What they really want is for Javon Davis to fight the perceived number 1 or number 2 pound-for-pound fighter in the sport, even if that fighter would be at a great disadvantage all the way up there at 135. It makes absolutely no sense in the boxing sense of the word, but in their mind's eye, that's not what's motivating that request.
It's not.
They see the positive press that Naoya Inoue is getting. They see that at least in some circles, he's regarded as the number 1 or number 2 pound-for-pound fighter in the sport, and what they want is for Javon to face this naturally smaller fighter so that if he beats him, Javon will be seen through that lens. But that's really not how this works, because
even Javon thinks it's a stupid proposition.
It is a stupid proposition. Weight classes exist for a reason, and I'm sure the people at the Rise podcast understand how weight classes work and how it would be less than ideal for a guy who's spent less than a year at super bantamweight to move up 4 weight classes for Javon Davis.
He literally just moved up to his 4th weight class this year, and he's there now.
You wouldn't expect Javon Davis, who's currently campaigning as a lightweight, to move all the way up there to junior middle or middle, so why would you expect Naoya Inoue, who's campaigning as a super bantamweight, to move all the way up to lightweight? It doesn't make sense.
Unless you have an ulterior motive.
And I think the people at the Rise podcast have an ulterior motive, among several others, and many Americans who have a strong aversion to Naoya Inoue being seen as the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter in the sport. Try as they might disguise it, this idea does not sit well with many Americans. Get a gander at Roy Jones Jr.'s reaction to the proposition that Naoya Inoue is the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter in the sport.
There's been discussion that maybe, Crawford and Inoue are going back and forth tussling for like pound for pound, that maybe Inoue because of the multiple weight divisions. You're shaking your head no. Tell me why no.
Because Inoue also, when he first moved up, he lost to Donaire. Don't forget that. Bud ain't lost nobody. Moving up or down, he moved up 3 times. He lost nobody. Don't tell me he better than Bud, no.
Roy went as far as claiming that Inoue lost to Nonito Donaire, and we all know that's not the case. He faced Donaire 2 times and beat him both times. Inoue, like Terrence Crawford, is an unbeaten fighter, an unbeaten champion, but that is how strong the aversion is towards Inoue being seen through the same lens in the same realm as Terrence. And I'd wager that what we see from the Rise podcast is another extension of that they can't think of anybody that might be able to beat Inoue at 122 or even 126, so they propose that he move all the way up there to 135, 4 divisions north of where he campaigns, so that Gervonta can beat him.
Been talking a lot about this on the channel the last 2 days.
It's all over social media that Inoue may have usurped the number 1 spot from Terrence Crawford on the predication that not only was he more active this year, but he became a 2-time undisputed champion just like Terrence in far less time. And he's been a champion at more weights than Terence overall. Inoue's been a champion in 4, whereas Terence has been a champion in 3. Inoue has taken more belts from more belt holders than Terence Crawford. And by that reckoning, he should be ranked at number 1, but there are a lot of people, they don't like the idea of this, and I'd wager it's more Western xenophobia, more Western prejudice. That
They don't want a little Asian guy to be the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter in the sport.
they think that the number 1 pound-for-pound fighter in the sport has to fit a certain kind of mold or look a certain way, be from a certain place. It's got to be somebody like a Floyd or somebody like that, but it's really not up to them.
Here at Ring IQ, based on the governing criteria, Inoue is number 1 until such a time as Terence does something to surpass him.
The prejudicial, linear, and biased views of a few have nothing to do with the decision-making around here. They can rate whoever they want at number 1 and number 2, but at Ring IQ, Inoue sits at the top of the totem pole. All it really is a bunch of insecure Americans hoping that Inoue moves so far up in weight he ends up getting beat, so that he's no longer in the conversation for the number 1 pound-for-pound spot. That's all it is. More childishness. Petulant childishness from people in the West. In men's heavyweight news, Frank Warren is ready, willing, and able to match Daniel Dubois against Anthony Joshua. Isn't it funny how much time Frank Warren has spent in the past talking down Anthony, saying that he's finished, and his fighter Tyson Fury calling him irrelevant, only for Frank Warren himself to start pitching ideas to match his guy against that same Anthony Joshua. Joshua was slated to face longtime rival Deontay Wilder on a March date in Saudi Arabia, but that scenario fell apart also last Saturday when Wilder suffered a lopsided decision loss to Joseph Parquier. The new frontrunner to face Joshua is unbeaten Philippe Prgovic, but Warren is ready and willing to position Dubois for an all-British clash with AJ. For me, Dubois could fight any of those guys in the top 10. Even AJ would be a good fight. I'd watch that all day long. I thought Daniel Dubois was brilliant, and by all accounts, he was. I myself counted out Daniel Dubois in the Jarrell Miller fight. I didn't think he would have the intestinal fortitude and wherewithal to withstand the pressure that a 326-pound Jarrell Miller would bring, but he did, and not only did he withstand it, he knocked him out, giving Jarrell Miller his first professional loss. Now, what Frank Warren means to do is put him in the ring with Anthony Joshua, and let's not beat around the bush. If Anthony didn't have the drawing power that he did, but had that same ability and that same record, minus the drawing power, Frank wouldn't be pitching this idea.
If he had the same ability, the same record, but not the same drawing power, Frank wouldn't be floating this out there.
And I want to make this abundantly clear that I'm not against the fight. I'm not against Anthony Joshua versus Daniel Dubois. I'm just highlighting how hypocritical it is for Frank Warren, who spent a long time trashing Anthony Joshua, to now hope to use him to sell a big fight. Thus is commonplace in the sport of boxing. Hypocrisy. Absolutely magnificent. He proved, he being Daniel Dubois, he proved to all his doubters that he does have heart in a tough fight against a guy who is very good with his gamesmanship, was tough competitor, and made him fight all the way. He needed a confidence booster. With that fight with Usyk, he gave Usyk his toughest fight. He hurt him to the body, and for me, that was a legitimate punch. And the referee giving him more than 4 minutes to recover was ridiculous. That fight is gone, and he got a lot of stick afterwards about his desire, whether he wants to really be at the top level. Well, he showed that he does, because that was a tough fight. He had to dig deep. He had to grit his teeth, and he did all those things.
And he won.
Does that mean Anthony Joshua is next? Well, with the Wilder fight having fallen apart, he is on the hunt for a new opponent, but they already have someone in mind, somebody who was already there, Philippe Prgovic, the IBF's interim champion, who, if Anthony Joshua fights him and beats him, will help him realize his dream of becoming a 3-time heavyweight world champion. Thus, in spite of Frank's enthusiasm, I don't know that we get Joshua versus Dubois. Perhaps that is a fight they can revisit.
Put him in the ring with Manuel Chaw.
It just so happens that Manuel Chaw Char is currently in possession of the same version of the WBA title that Daniel used to hold, the version of the title that got him the Usyk fight as a result of a settlement between Manuel Char and the WBA. The Manuel Char fight is by and large a very winnable fight for Daniel Dubois, and it will get him back in position to fight for a full title. Full version that will be on the line in the Usyk versus Fury fight. And if Alexander Usyk wins that fight, if he does what I think he's going to do to Tyson Fury, I don't expect to see a rematch, and I don't expect Alexander Usyk to stay around the sport of boxing much longer. Once he becomes undisputed, he may so retire, thereby vacating all the alphabet titles he would have won. If Daniel Dubois plays his cards right, perhaps he can pick one up and see himself become a full heavyweight champion, because all he ever had was a secondary title, not a full title.
So think about it. If Daniel were to fight Manuel Char and he beat him, and Anthony were to fight Filip Hrgovic and he beat him, they would both end up in a pole position to become champions themselves, at which point, once they do, they can do a unification match between them on British soil that I have no doubts would sell out.
Was the Saudis' intention to do the Joshua versus Wilder fight in March, but we know that Wilder couldn't hold up his end of the bargain, and now whatever energy and interest was there for that fight, it's all but gone. So what they might do is Joshua versus Hrgovic for IBF interim status in March.
I think Anthony's made that very clear, that outside of that Wilder fight, what his intentions were to become a 3-time heavyweight champion. Now that Wilder's out of the mix,
bring on Filip Hrgovic. Filip, who I've given a chance. I've been watching Filip Hrgovic in action ever since he went pro out of the amateurs, and I'm not impressed with what I see. I think Anthony stands a very good chance of beating that guy and becoming IBF interim champion. Filip Hrgovic, who nothing really stands out about him. Not his speed, not his power. He's a slow, cumbersome heavyweight.
and I said this in my previous video, even though Anthony Joshua is hardly a speedster, he's still very fast for a man his size, about 6'6", 240, 250. He's got snap on his punches and mobility.
His movements are a lot more fluid and a lot less robotic than what you get from Filip Hrgovic. I could very much see him out-jabbing Filip Hrgovic, thereby preventing many of those rabbit punches that Filip Hrgovic seems to get away with. I could see Anthony being too fast and too sharp and too strong for Filip Hrgovic, opening the door for Anthony to become a champion again.
And while he does that, Daniel can fight Manuel Char. I mean, if the Saudis were willing to pay for a Hrgovic versus Mark Demori fight, then surely they'd be willing to pay for Dubois versus Char.
It's the same kind of fight, the same kind of mismatch, except when it comes to that mismatch, there will actually be something of value on the line. A WBA secondary title that can be used to fight for the primary. And I'm sure Daniel would like to see himself crowned a full-fledged world champion. If they play their cards right, he can, and they can. Schedule it for the undercard of the upcoming Fury versus Usyk fight. I don't see why not. That's a very winnable fight for Daniel Dubois. He doesn't need a full camp for that one. He can knock out Mahmoud Char. As it pertains to Daniel Dubois, who we just discussed, Zhilei Zhang is confident he would beat Daniel Dubois easily, and I feel so inclined to agree. It's great that Daniel was able to get back in the winner's bracket against Jarrell Miller, but I don't have any illusions about what would happen if you put him in the ring with Zhang. Ultimately, the 40-year-old contender doesn't feel slighted considering Dubois' age. Zhang believes he should steer clear of him, at least for now. It might be too early for him to get in the ring with me, Zhang told BoxingScene.com. I can see his potential, maybe 1 or 2 fights down the line, but right now, it's probably a bit early.
Is it?
Daniel doesn't slip punches too good, and he doesn't protect his head, he doesn't move it. So if he were to jab his way within striking distance of Zhang, step into his jab, he'd be in line for a counter left hand, Zhang's backhand.
Like what he did to Joe Joyce.
The way he was able to use Joe Joyce's aggression against him by hanging back, countering out out of the high guard with the straight left hand, the backhand. Lest we forget, Zhilei Zhang is a southpaw. Daniel Dubois is an orthodox fighter. He could employ a similar strategy against Daniel, who I do think packs a big punch, and he's got some speed, some power.
But he doesn't move his head.
Go stepping into your punches against Zhilei Zhang, looking to bring other punches over. He can catch you in between, and if he does, he packs a very authoritative straight left hand. That could be bad news for Daniel Dubois if that were to be his next fight. Now, after digging deep to become the first man to stop Miller, the naysayers haven't had much to say. Zhang admits that Dubois looked sharp and powerful. He also acknowledges that Dubois is one of the best heavyweights out there. With that said, the Chinese native is confident that he'll barely break a sweat in a showdown against him. It would be pretty easy.
Zhang is with Queensberry.
If it's anybody's responsibility to get Zhang a fight, a meaningful fight, or a stay busy fight, or really any kind of fight, it's Frank Warren, it's George Warren, it's Queensberry. The byproduct of his initial deal to get Joe Joyce in the ring, what turned out to be 2 fights instead of just 1. Now, they have options on Zhang, and for the time being, he is on that side of the street. Thus, a fight between Zhang and Daniel, that would be an in-house fight, an in-house affair, though, as stated, if that were Daniel's next fight, I would favor Zhang to win that fight. In spite of Zhang being a lot older than Daniel, he's also a more well-schooled boxer than Daniel that comes from a deeper amateur background, and we see what he can do in the pros. Where Joe Joyce gave Daniel his first professional loss, Zhang did a demolition job on that same Joe Joyce.
But if he's not fighting Daniel, what is he gonna do?
The Saudis could always pay to bring him over, maybe put him in the ring with former WBO champion Joseph Parker or Agit Kabayel, who just upset the apple cart for then unbeaten Arslanbek Makhmudov. Maybe they can do that. And maybe Frankie Sanchez. Any one of these fights would be solid fights for Zhilei Zhang, but they wouldn't be big fights. They wouldn't be big money fights with a big profile. Not that long ago, Zhang was calling for a fight with Anthony Joshua, but we know what Anthony's got in mind, and we know what he might do. He might fight Filip Hrgovic next.
It's the way it is.
And I'm not completely sure what the people at Queensberry might have in mind for Zhilei Zhang moving forward. He's a capable boxer, that's established, though a bit of a tough sell on British soil. Maybe they'll loan him out to Top Rank, maybe they'll fly him to America, fight on a couple of Top Rank shows. We know that Frank and Bob have a good working relationship. Maybe they can put Zhang in there with Charles Martin.
He's gotta do something, he's 40 years old.
What a trip over to the WBO's current rank standings reveals is that Zhilei Zhang is the interim champion. Anthony Joshua, he is ranked at number 1, but he may be going the IBF route. Jared Anderson, who's promoted by Top Rank, who I just mentioned, he's ranked at number 2. That sets a precedence for a Zhang versus Jared Anderson fight. Ranked at number 3 is former WBO champion Joseph Parker, and ranked at number 4 is Frankie Sanchez.
Filip Hrgovic is ranked at number 5, but Filip might end up fighting Anthony, so that rules them out.
At number 6, you have former unified heavyweight champion Andy Ruiz, who sat out all of this year. There was supposed to be a fight between him and Deontay Wilder. That doesn't look to be happening. He was in attendance for the Day of Reckoning card, and I don't think he was just there on leisure. To some degree, I think he was there on business, and the Saudis can find use for him. So maybe you get Zhang versus Ruiz. Why not?
Andy needs a fight, and Andy wants to get paid.
So we'll see what the people at Queensberry do for Zhilei Zhang.